All right, thank God. Okay, so the last two classes in Yehoshua, we effectively, not by plan, but just how it worked out, in laying out who Yehoshua was and who the Hav was, and just the beginnings of what they built, we ended up covering the first two parakim of Sefer Yehoshua, of the book of Yehoshua. We're going to cover the next three chapters tonight. Again, in and out of the text, putting together the key ideas and points. And the way I want to frame it is that what we're going to describe and share together tonight are the 37 most important days ever in Jewish history. Okay? Think about Matan Torah, splitting of the sea, all that. I believe that you'll agree with me when we're done that the days that we're about to describe and understand together are more impactful to the Jewish people over the long term, immediately and over the long term, and more impactful to the world as we engage the world than even the time period immediately after leaving Egypt. So we're going to go into that together and just frame in your minds that we're talking about a 37-day period in total. Good? Okay, day one, Zayin Adar. What happened on the 7th day of Adar? Who remembers?
Moshe was born and he died the same day.
Excellent, David. Moshe Rabbeinu is born and Moshe Rabbeinu passes on the 7th day of Adar, right? What else is in the month of Adar? What else is in that month?
Purim.
Purim, right? Purim is in that month, but we don't have an issue with Purim. Why? Zeke, why no issue with Purim?
No issue with Purim at all
Yeah.
in life, or what do you mean?
No, in this story. In this,
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, because it's
Right. Okay. There we go.
Okay. So 7th of Adar, right? Now, how long do we mourn Moshe Rabbeinu?
30 days.
30 days. We mourn Moshe Rabbeinu 30 days. So if we mourn Moshe Rabbeinu 30 days, where are we? We're on the 6th of Nisan, right? The 6th of Nisan. Good. Now, what does Yehoshua do based on what we covered in the last two classes? What does he do on the 6th of Nisan? He does two things. Anybody remember? Right after they get up from the 30-day mourning period for Moshe Rabbeinu, Yehoshua bin Nun turns to the Jewish people and he says, Hitkatshu, get ready, because in 3 days you're going into the land. Good? 3 days you're going into the land. What else does he do at that point? What else does he do?
Send the Miraglim.
Excellent. He sends the Miraglim at the same time. So we're talking about the 6th of Nisan. He notifies the people that we're moving in, and he sends the Miraglim at the same time. Good. The Miraglim are in the land of Israel for how long?
2 days, right?
Yeah. Couple of days. Good.
Okay.
Couple of days. During that couple of day period, who are we introduced to? Who's discovered?
Rachav.
Beautiful. Rachav is discovered. Great. The grandma and great grandma of 6 of the giant Kohanim Nevi'im, who we're going to learn about as we go on. Good. Now, on the 10th of Nisan, what happens? So we have 7th of Adar, 30 days pass, 6th of Nisan. We alert the people, we send the spies, couple of day period, Rachav is discovered. Good. What happens on the 10th of Nisan? 10th of Nisan. Split. What splits?
Yarden. The Yarden?
Beautiful. Perfect, Serene. The Yarden splits. We're going to talk about how that happens in a minute. The Yarden splits. Great. What happens the day after the Jewish people cross into the land of Israel as a result of the Jordan River splitting? What happens? What happens is every body gets a bris. When was the last time Shemalu et Bnei Israel? When was the last time? before they left Egypt, on the same day, 40 years earlier, on the 11th day of Nisan, we gave circumcisions to everybody. What happened in the desert, Rachel? In this respect? Nothing. Nothing.
It wasn't clean enough.
They
Wasn't
suspended-
safe.
Right, we
Wasn't
suspended,
safe. Huh?
we suspended Brit Milah, right?
What's that?
Suspended the Milah.
We suspended Brit Milah for
Suspended
those
Milan,
40.
right, Joe? Exactly. We suspended Milan. Now, let's just pause on that a minute. In the desert, we moved how many times? How many times did we move in the desert? So to put the suspension of Milah into its proper context, how many times did we move in the desert? And what do we call those moves? These are core concepts that you need to own. We call them the Membet Masaot, the 42 journeys. Now, the 42 journeys are highlighted in the Parashiot of Matot, Mas'eh, where we detail, in quotation marks, the 42 places we moved to. Zeke, what's the qualifier there? What facilitated the movement?
Yeah,
I'm not gonna say dilly-dally because you'll shoot me down again, right?
Right, Serena already took care of you. The Anan facilitated the movement, right? The
Right.
Anan
Okay.
facilitated the movement. The Anan started to move. Bnei Israel would immediately pack up, night, day. They had just gotten there the day before, whatever it might have been, and they moved. Now, what's the
They
challenge?
follow the Anan. They follow. you
Follow
said,
the
right?
Anan, great. What's the challenge with the Membet Masaot, the 42 stops? What's the challenge with that?
Well, that means they traveled for 10 years each stop?
Well, they actually did most of the traveling in the first year.
Well, no, 4 years.
And the
Whatever.
last year or so. They actually did
Okay.
most of the traveling in the very beginning and then the last year or so, 39th, 40th year. That's really, they did most of the travel. But the challenge with the Membet Masaot is we have not found a number of these places. We don't know if they ever existed. Many of them we found, many of them we haven't found. Now they're in the desert and it's a long time ago. So you would say, okay, so we didn't find them. Our
Right.
rabbis struggle with it. And we end up with two perspectives here. And it's important to know in the context of what we're doing here. Perspective A is the growth in the Jewish people happened when they went from place A. In place A, they grew X amount. They went to place B. That second place, Mishanem Makom, a new place, created other challenges, other opportunities for them. And in place B, they grew in a different sense. That opinion would obligate us to say that the 42 places are there. Because if they grew at a certain locale based on the influences, based on the energy of that location, you have to say that these locations existed and they grew 42 levels up.
So there's no growth if you can't prove they existed. That's the downside. If
Excellent.
there's no real growth.
Excellent.
Really?
Excellent.
Why?
So wait a second. That's opinion A. Okay,
Uh-huh.
Opinion B. Opinion B is that the growth didn't happen when they were stationed in the location. The growth happened in transit, during the journey. That's what created the growth. Therefore, do these 42 places all have to have had exist? Who cares if they did or they didn't?
Right.
Because the point was that the emergence of the Jewish people was shaped as a result of this movement and movement and movement and movement and movement. So did Tarach exist? I don't know. Maybe it did, but who cares? But the point is, you're telling me that there were 42 levels of gradation of movement that the Jewish people took as a result from moving from place to place. And a little further on, we're going to talk more about what those specific platforms of growth were. Okay?
Can I?
Yeah, Joe?
I just want to make sure I understand this. Oh, I've heard that archaeologists have not found any remnants in the desert. Is that what we're talking about here?
That's not what we're talking about, but yes, I've heard that as well, that there are archaeologists who contest the fact that Jewish people were in the desert altogether. We're not saying that, no. We're saying they were in the desert. They were in the desert for 40 years. But the locations that are highlighted in these two parashiyot that summarize all of our stops in the desert, Torah authorities who hold that we were in the desert can't identify all of them. So now you have a question. So that begs the question. It begs the question of them being physical or not. If you could identify all of them, you would say this is a physical listing of all the
I see.
places we went to. But once you can't identify all of them, now you have to weigh in on the Dirisha side, right? Like we've talked about, on the side where we can expand the concept, look beyond the pshat of the pasuk, and say, well, you know what? Maybe there weren't 42 places. Who cares? If there weren't 42 places, so what are you telling me? Well, I'm telling you there was movement and growth. Okay, then the drop down question is, well, when did the movement happen? When did the growth happen? One opinion said in journey, and one opinion says when we stopped. Now,
Question. We have the Mishkan yet or no? That's later.
we have the Mishkan, yeah.
Oh, we
We
have,
have
so
the
they're breaking it down every time. they move.
Exactly, that's right. Very good, very good. Okay, so just philosophically for us, it's a very important question in our
But
own.
either way, there's growth. It doesn't matter. What do we care?
Of course we care. Of course we care.
Why?
Tell me why we care. Tell me why
I
we
don't,
care.
I don't understand it. It doesn't
Okay,
matter
good.
if I went from Detroit to Michigan or to, I'm sorry, to North Carolina. I grew between point A and point B. Who
Very
cares
good.
where I was and where I started and where I ended
Right,
up?
so anybody have a thought on that? What's the difference? Yeah, Rachel?
I said, we want to know how we grow.
Exactly. That's exactly right. We want to know how we grow. Do I grow when I'm uprooted, when I'm off balance, when I'm in journey, when I'm transitioning?
That's still not place specific. All those things you're talking about are not specific to a location.
Right, 1 second. We said there's two issues here. Tonight, we're going to just touch on one. I want to just put out to you the argument of, do we grow in transit or do we grow in settlement? My affinity is that we grow in transit.
Right.
I'm unsettled. I'm out of my habitat. I'm questioning myself. I don't know where I'm going to end up because they didn't know where the Anan was going to stop. Yeah.
Yeah, but Ricky, well, I would say that they're only growing in transit. They're in the desert. Every place they go is like the same thing over and over. I don't think that they're gonna experience anything new when they see another piece of
Excellent.
sand.
Excellent. And that's why that's why I hold with the opinion that they grew in transit. Because what did this other place offer that was so much different than the place
Right.
before? Okay, you have to say that the whole desert experience was metaphysical because the physical trappings were absolutely limited, right? There's nothing. It was absolutely nothing. So there was a different energy in one place than the other place. Okay,
Right.
I would hold with you on that. But
Also,
I think, yeah.
they don't have to worry about the food. They know they're having food. They know they're gonna have water from the well. So like, what are they gonna have to worry about when they go to the new place?
Exactly. So, so you're saying even the in transit wouldn't mean anything.
There's no out of your comfort zone scenario, really.
Right. Right.
So I'll tell you the way our rabbis frame it is as follows. Hi, Sari, how are you? The way our
Hey, I'm
rabbis
good.
frame it is as follows. The breaking down camp on a moment's notice
What?
and picking up and leaving, not knowing where you're going, even if where you're going to is very similar to what you just left, was the growth facilitator for the Jewish people in terms of them building their absolute belief in God. Now, if that's true, well, I would say like this. Let's say, Serene, you and I further our point, which is that what's the difference if you're looking at this mountain of sand or that mountain of sand, right?
Right.
The answer would be, why move around? Why move them? Oh, I have to move them because there's something fundamentally different from a metaphysical point of view in each place. Okay, opinion A. Or as the Or HaHaim HaKadosh says, no, there was something metaphysically essential in me moving.
It could have been on a treadmill, it would have been effective.
I couldn't, if I could have been on a treadmill, I don't think so. I don't
No?
think so. No.
So, because you're not going from one place to another?
I would say it differently. I would say I just started to get settled, whatever my reality is. I just got settled in on this sand dune. I'm essentially blindfolded and I'm moving to, I don't know where. And I don't
Right.
know why. And I don't know how the setup's going to be there. Now, it may be a lot the same, but it may not. And by the way, what if someone attacks us in the journey? There were all kinds of things going on in the desert, right? We know that they had issues. So I think we need to, for now, I want you to just have the Membet Masaot, the 42 sojourns in your minds. And I want you to put in your minds this rabbinic argument that says, do we grow when we've arrived or do we grow when we're unsettled? And just hold that. Okay.
Can you explain the first opinion? Because I'm not following it.
Right. So the first opinion said that, how Brooklyn, let's say, has a different energy than Staten Island. That there are different core values, there are different leaders, there are different cultural elements pronounced in each borough. So the first opinion would say that as you move from borough A to borough B, so to speak, that those influences, those energies are what move the people from point A to point B, then from point 37 to point 38, and so on and so on. The trappings of the place. Now you're going to tell me it's a desert. What were they? I'm going to tell you they were overwhelmingly metaphysical.
And you're also saying that they contribute to the growth, that the energy
1,000%. 1,000%.
contributes to the go. Right. Okay.
Now, I want you, again, we're going to go into this and we're going to talk about some of the specific areas of growth in each of the steps on another class. I just want you to, just for now, know Membet Masaot, 42 sojourns. It's a core Jewish concept. It's a core Kabbalistic concept. We're going to touch on its baby brother briefly tonight in what we do here. And that's why I want you to hold it. Okay? Hold it, struggle with it, know it. Good, so far. Okay, great. Now, so on the 11th, we get, everybody gets circumcised. There are 3 days of recovery, right? What do our rabbis say about the 3 days of recovery?
The
Why-
third
The
day is
third
the,
day is the hardest, right?
All right,
Yeah.
very good. Third day is the hardest. Excellent. What do we do on the third day? Afternoon of the third day. First time in 40 years. Another great milestone. What is it? It's the 14th of Nisan. What do we do?
Korban Pesach.
Beautiful. We bring
Pesach.
Korban Pesach, the Paschal sacrifice, Grand Slam. When was the last time we brought it, Zeke?
In Egypt.
Beauty, 40 years before. Great, got it, good. Now, what about some of the other elements here? What about the man? What's the story with the man? What's the story
stop?
with the man? Do we still have man or don't we have man?
Not when we go in.
Right. Once we cross over the Jordan, the man stops. What are we eating from? What are al matzot made from?
eating from the korban, right?
Well, the matzot. What are the matzot? They're
Oh.
eaten with the korban. Great. What are they made
Huh. I never thought of that.
from?
Mhm.
No more man. What did they make from? They bought grain from the land. They bought grain from the Canaanites, and they baked matzah themselves. Good.
So there's interaction with other people.
There's absolutely interaction with other people. Great. So,
Huh.
what do we
Where
have?
did they get the where'd they get the water?
They bought it. They bought water. They bought water. They bought grain, And that's how they made the matzot. And they bought animals, or we believe they had livestock with them to shech the animals. And where does this all happen? What's the place called? It's an important place because we spend 400 years with this place, not 400, I'm sorry, 17 years with this place, a little more, as the center point. It's called the Gilgal, okay? And that is the command post from which the tribes go out and begin to conquer the land of Israel. Now, after the Mishkan spends 17 years or so in Gilgal, where do we go after that? Where does the Mishkan send about 400 years? In the city of Shiloh. And what do we have after that for approximately 400 years? We have the first temple, and then approximately 70, 80 years later, we have 400 years of the second temple. So in total, we have about 1,200 years between Mishkan, first temple, second temple. Good. Okay, great. Now, let's look at some of these events a little more in detail. When the story starts in the beginning of the third Perek, it says, Vayashkem Yehoshua baboker. What does that remind you of?
Abraham.
Yeah, beautiful. What are the words with Abraham, Zeke?
Abraham woke up early in the morning, right? What was it?
Exactly.
I forget.
How does it in
the Hebrew.
Hebrew? Vayashkem Abraham baboker.
Right.
It's the exact words. Vayashkem Yehoshua baboker. The hashkim means to wake up early, right? To bring forth the day. So the Navi uses the same exact language. Why? Why would the Navi, Rachel, use the same exact language? And Abraham got up early and Joshua got up early. Why?
Because it's the covenant. The Milah, Abraham did it for the Milah,
Right.
and Yehoshua is doing it to conquer the land. They're
Beautiful, Joe.
I mean,
the Navi is coming to tell us, remember when it said by Yashkem Abraham Baboker? Meaning that was the day of defining who Abraham was, the day of the Akedat Yitzchak.
exactly.
Right? So that was Abraham's defining day. By Yashkem Yehoshua Baboker, it's Yehoshua's defining day. It's the day that will frame Yehoshua forever in the eyes of the Jewish people and the eyes of the world. So what do we learn from this? What do we learn from this? Serene, when you read Vayashkem Yehoshua Baboker, what are you going to say? What are you going to do when you read the pasuk? What would you do? You would say, wait a second. I've heard these words before. I know.
Pay attention.
Beauty. I know I heard this before. I know if the Navi went out of his way to use the same term, it means that I'm being drawn back to that place. It's on purpose. So you need to have your antenna up for these kinds of words. When you see the same term, particularly in a prophetic work, as in a biblical work, in a Torah work, you gotta say, 1 second, there's a deliberate connectedness here. Now, we're not gonna go into it, but there's a Kabbalistic perspective on this that says that the whole splitting of the Jordan River was in the schut, in the merit of Avraham Avinu. So the Vayashkem, and he woke early, not only positions Yehoshua in our minds as this being his day of coming, but it might even say more. So the topical lesson is there's a connection between the two. The more important lesson is look for these words and let them jump at you and connect the dots. Rachel, you with me?
Very much so.
Okay, connect the dots, recognize the terms. Good, excellent. Now, in the same pasuk, what does it say? Vayas'u mehashitim, and the Jewish people journeyed from a place called Shittim. Hey, Erwin, how are you? Vayavo ad hayarden. Vayavo'u. And they came. But 1 second. Here again, I want you to own these terms. Hey, Erwin, I want you to own these terms. Vayavo'u. Talk to me, Zeke. Whenever you see the term bo, lavo, vayavo, and they came, what is the Torah or the Navi telling you? Sorry, any idea? When you see the term vayavo, what do you think? I want you to own the rule. Own the rule. Serene, any thoughts?
Maybe they were prepared. They were ready. They were ready for action. They were.
Okay, good. It has a much broader meaning than the physical getting to the place. Whenever you
Yes,
see
it's
the
essential.
term vayavo, whenever,
Maybe.
yeah.
I just thought maybe if someone says when they came, maybe they arrived mentally. I don't know.
Beautiful. Excellent, Sarah. Excellent. Whenever you see the term bo, vayavo, lavo, it means there was a spiritual ascension. There was a spiritual ascension. It's a tip-off. Whenever you see the term vayavo, it's a tip-off. Because in the pshat of the pasuk, in the basic language of the pasuk, it might not be so overt. So you know, oh, wait, it's a vayavo moment. It's a vayavo moment here. What's cooking?
Where
here?
else do we see it? Where else do we see it earlier?
Everywhere. I'll give you a challenging place where you see it. Why?
When the brothers went to
Beautiful. You see it when the first psukim in Sefer Shemot detail how the Jewish people ba'u mitzrayma. Now, vayavo, ba'u mitzrayma, I think the exact terminology is. Why is that troubling in that case?
Well, that's not a good thing, is it?
Why not, Zeke?
I don't know. Is it? We've arrived where we've risen to accept coming to Egypt?
Okay, but you have the rule, right? So what do you want to do now?
I don't know.
Okay. What would you do? Serene, what do you want to do? You're reading the pshat of the pasuk, the basic language of the pasuk, which says, wait a minute, the Jews are going to Egypt. This ain't a good thing. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu went out of its way to use the term bo. So what do you want to say?
I think maybe they had to start this whole redemption process. So it started somewhat spiritually.
Fabulous. I look at the whole thing differently because I'm given a bo. It says, you know what? This wasn't a dissension. This wasn't a failure. This was the beginning of an ascension, the beginning of a major growth. It reframes everything. It reframes the slavery that the Jews went through. It reframes everything.
Life is happening for me, not to me. Yeah.
Exactly, Zeke. Excellent. And now I'm not looking at all these awful things that happened to the Jewish people and mourning those awful things. I'm looking at a big picture, and I'm looking at an ascension process that started in a way that certainly didn't appear positive. But if it was the beginning of a positive, then now I have to chart the steps as they take me to that ultimate positive of Matan Torah. So now, rather than looking at surface details of a story, like the story of Egypt, where you would look at it, okay, this was bad, that was worse, that was awful. Okay, but that's not the story. It's in the context of an ascension. Wait a second. So what is the ascension in slavery? What is the great elevation in Shifra and Pu'ah? What is the ascension when they make it harder for them to make the bricks? That changes my whole way of learning because I framed it differently. You might remember when we talked about in Megillat Ruth, you might remember that when Boaz bumps into Ruth, we have the term Vehine. And I mentioned at the time, and you should own this, own it. You own a handful of words. The whole Torah is different. Hine means, whenever you see the term hine, little tiny word, it means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu intervened in the normal course of things to make something gigantic happen.
An open miracle,
Huh?
an open miracle.
You may call it a miracle, you may call it whatever you want, but the point is, when you see that Boaz and Ruth meet, you could say, oh yeah, that's great. You could say, oh, it's Bashert, but that's not what the Navi is telling you. The Navi is telling you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, so to speak. Hey, Joy, HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself stepped into the story to make this happen. Whoa, stand
Divine
back.
intervention. Gotcha. Yeah.
Divine intervention.
Divine intervention.
Which, where does that take me? Where does that take me? If there was divine intervention, where does it take me when I'm reading the same story? It makes
To a positive place. It makes you feel like this is supposed to happen.
absolutely. And what more? What more than that? What more? Just one little word. What more does it tell me? It tells
Beneficial.
huh?
It's beneficial.
And what else? HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. God sets up the laws of nature, right? Person has absolute free will. This, that, all the stuff we know. But then he steps into the thing and makes this thing happen. Don't tell me God stepped in. Just tell me they met. Wouldn't I believe if Boaz and Ruth met that it was meant to be? Of course I would believe that. But when you tell me the Vihine, you're telling me stand up, man. Shake in your boots. Look what's going on here. There's something game-changing happening. One little word. HaKadosh Baruch Hu steps in. I'm going to repeat another word, and some of you have heard it from me a few times, but I'm going to say it one more time just in this concept. Zik, Vayakom. What does it mean?
Not up,
Somebody stood up, right?
right?
Vayakom melech hadash al Mitzrayim. Vayakom Hana. What does it mean? Somebody stands up. What does it mean, Jake, whenever we see the term Vayakom or Kam? What does it
You're going
mean?
to say that it's outside of nature, outside of.
Not in this, no. Stick with Vihine on that. Talk to me about Vayakom. What does it mean?
You woke up?
Whenever you see the term Vayakom, whenever you see it, it means that a person took his or her life into his or her own hands, and that will have a dramatic change on Jewish and probably world history. You with me?
So somebody asserted themselves.
Somebody asserted himself, exactly. And the ramifications are going to be gigantic. So again,
But more above and beyond what somebody else might do. We're not always.
the ramifications are going to have an impact, probably a dramatic change impact on the person himself or herself, on the Jewish people profoundly and over an extended period of time, and on the world around us. Holy cow. So you could read the word Vayakom, okay, he stood up, or he didn't stood up, or she stood up. And then you could say, oh man, Vayakom, fasten your seatbelt. You have major stuff about to happen.
Wow.
Good.
So it's like a sonic boom. You know, this is a major thing.
It's a linguistic sonic boom. Exactly. It's a linguistic sonic boom. These words are. And that's why they should be. When you see Vayavo'u, I'm so uplifted. Vayavo'u ad hayarden. The Jewish people just said Vayachu. Vayachu el hayarden. It would have said a very different thing. They walked to the Jordan. Vayavo'u ad hayarden. They were uplifted. They came to the Jordan River. Oh man, that means they were in a very different place. Really, what place were they in? And how did it happen? You with me? All that from the word. You with me, Erwin?
Yeah, I just want one question.
What?
Excuse my voice, it's shot. But so you said Vayanani, what would be the difference, or are they synonymous? Vayanani, Besheret, and divine intervention. They all really Hashem's play to make it happen, no?
So okay, so let's see. So Hine means
Yeah.
Hakadosh Baruch Hu is stepping in, right?
Okay, good.
Bashert or Nasib is a little bit different. There's an interesting malach, an interesting discussion in the Gemara on what does Bashert or Nasib mean. One opinion is that Bashert means that I meet the most right person who's identified for me 40 days before I'm born. That's one interpretation. The other interpretation is that most right person is identified for me based on my actions, based on my life, based on my identity, right?
Right.
And either one is a bashert, but it can't be. Can't be.
Right.
Because if my nasib is identified 40 days before I'm born, I don't have any actions. I haven't done anything yet. So our rabbis reconcile as follows. It's in Masechet Sotah, and it's beautiful. And I'm very comfortable with it, and I like it because it speaks to what I believe is right. For the first person someone would marry, assuming that they were married more than once, that first person was identified 40 days before the soul was born on this earth. If for whatever reason that marriage did not work,
Right.
and the second nasib, and the chidush there is that there's a second nasib, is identified based on the person's actions, which makes total sense. So in either case, what the upshot is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in the process,
Right.
and that initially you have this pristine entity connected to that pristine entity,
Right.
but sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, right? God willing, most of the time it does, but sometimes it doesn't. Now,
Right, but Hashem would have a backup plan if he has that in mind, no?
exactly, but the backup plan, you can't go back to the first criteria
Right.
of setting somebody up 40 days before they're born. You can't go back to the first criteria.
Right.
So what do? You go to the second criteria, which is it's based on the person's actions, which makes total sense. How a person defines himself or himself will define who that person should connect to at that point in time.
You can't skip to the second one first. That would be the right way to go.
What's that? Say that again?
You
He's
can't
saying
skip to
to
the
skip
second
one
one.
and go straight to the one that works.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's
Ricky.
why. Yeah.
Ricky, what about somebody who never gets married and then they're a good person and then they never, their actions aren't good enough for them to ever find anybody?
So if the person didn't get married, never got married, and
Right.
the one they're nasib, you're saying? The person they were supposed to marry?
I guess, yeah, they never found them. What about their merit? They're not going to get either one?
So
I like that.
So the person didn't find the first one, and what happened after that? What do you?
And never got married.
The person never got married altogether.
Right, and they're a good person. They're tzaddik. What do you say about that?
Why did it happen?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to say this, and I've thought about this question a lot for a bunch of reasons.
Right.
But I believe that the two positions in the Gemara that I just presented, my personal opinion is that it's not one or the other, it's both. In other words, for a person to meet their first nasib, it's a combination of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu identified and a person's actions. Because if a person was slated to meet somebody, but then this person, Reuven, who was slated to meet Sarah, doesn't act at all like Reuven. He acts completely out of character. He steps completely away from himself. He's not going to fit with Sarah. So I believe that the truest truth is that there's a person identified, but in addition to that, it's based on the individual's actions. Because if I'm not living true to myself, identifying with me, having my identity, I could walk right past that other person because I'm acting like somebody else. So Hakadosh Baruch Hu identified me to be with her, but I'm not being true to me, so I'm not going to be with her. You with me?
I
Yeah.
am. It's hard to grasp when you see somebody that is being themselves and it's a good person and they just don't get married. Like it's just hard to deal
Tough to
with.
say as a blanket statement, I think, right? I mean,
Yeah, it's hard to say about everybody.
So that's why I believe it's both Nasib and Maasim.
But in that scenario,
Right.
when you see somebody that's not married or whatever it is, for whatever reason, we have to also believe that there's another person on the planet
100%.
that is not married because they're not married, right? That hasn't found them.
Or is suitable at that stage in their life to marry them. So we're a little bit off topic, but let's spend.
Okay.
No, it's good. Let's spend another minute on this.
Okay.
Let's say we know people who are not married, right? Right? Know people who are not married, right? What's our responsibility? I'll tell you my perspective based on what we've said. My perspective is that our responsibility is to build that person's self-confidence and self-love, build that person's identity. And when we do that, they'll be able to love another person and to let
Okay.
it in their life. But that's not what a lot of people do. A lot of people take a list of their likes and dislikes and try to find someone who they can pair up with. The pairing goes on, but it isn't successful because this person, the original Reuven, so to speak, doesn't have a strong enough love of self to give to the other person. Reuven doesn't have an identity. He doesn't really know who he is or what he wants. So how can he love somebody else? So I really believe that these later in life Bashert organizations, these Shidduch organizations, should be spending the overwhelming majority of their time and resources getting into the lives of the
Wow.
people who reached out to them to give them a career direction, to give them a chesed direction, to give them a learning direction, to give them a hobby direction, to give them the things through which they can self-express so that they can self-love, so that they can love another.
They can attract the love from another person. That's what it is, really, right?
And it has to, and that's the Maasim side. That's the actions.
Right.
That's the action side. Right. Okay. So here we are. We're at the Jordan River. Yeah. We said there's Shloshet Yemei Hagbala, so to speak, here as well. 3 days of preparation. Why do we traditionally, I think Serene, you mentioned this, why do we traditionally look for those 3 days of preparation? Why is that sort of a Jewish model? Why do
We did that for Matan Torah, no?
Yeah, excellent. But why 3 days? Why do we want 3 days? Sari, what are your thoughts? As an educator, what are your thoughts? Why do we need 3 days?
I don't know, but I just want to understand, like, okay, so the men got bris, they had Passover, and then they waited 3 days?
No, so they waited. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. We're really going back to the beginning now. We're at the 30th day after Moshe Rabbeinu passes away on the 6th of Nisan, and now Yehoshua turns to the Jewish people and he says, "Get ready over the next 3 days because we're going to cross the Jordan," which they do on the 10th. So the question is, why 3 days? So in Judaism and in life, this 3-day concept is extremely valuable. The perspective is, and Erwin, I wonder if this would enter into some of the work you do. You know, when someone approaches us with something, maybe it's emotional, maybe it's challenging, day one, where our heart is sort of drawn to them, right? Our heart is drawn to them. Day two, we have the opportunity to disengage emotionally. And then day three, we have the opportunity to objectify. So Judaism is codifying something very important. It's saying that whenever you have a very big decision to make, or somebody reached out to you with an issue in their life that needs some complex level of involvement, you may have a clear, objective gut perspective minute one. But if it's a more difficult case where it's tugging heavily on your emotions, then best to give it 3 days. 1 day to be totally subjective, 1 day to balance, and then the 3rd day to be able to objectively approach the issue. In this case, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving the Jewish people 3 days because he doesn't want us to be swept up in it. He doesn't want us to be head over heels fainting for what he's going to do, losing our sense of objectivity. He wants the exact opposite. He wants a great level of excitement and anticipation day 1, then a balancing out day 2, then a moving away from the emotion and a purely objective, clean perspective on day 3 when Hashem comes out. And why does God want that? Why does he want us to be objective and clean-headed when these fabulous things happen, like splitting the Jordan River? He wants us that way because he doesn't want us to be overwhelmed by his might and by his power. He doesn't want that. He wants us to objectively look at it and be able to engage in it without falling head over heels, so to speak.
Right.
Okay, so that's what God wants all the time, and that's a very interesting perspective. And it flies in the face of the miracle thing. The miracle thing says that God is looking for shock and awe. He's not. He's not. If he was looking for shock and awe, he'd never give us a warning, right? He'd fly the planes out, so to speak, without any warning. But he does the exact opposite. I'm telling you what's going to happen. It's going to be miraculous. We're going to split the sea. We're going to split the Jordan. You're going to hear the voice of God in the giving out of the Torah. One of those things can happen, but it's going to happen 3 days from now. So see if you could work the emotional side away and approach it in a purely objective way.
Right.
Good. What does the splitting of the Jordan River look like? What does it look like?
Isn't it like a column or something?
Super. So what did the splitting of the Red Sea look like? That was particularly interesting. According to our rabbis, what does it look like?
Wasn't it like 2 walls?
Our rabbis say that some opinions say it was 2 walls, one on either side, and some opinions say that it was 12. That each of the tribes went in their shvil, in their path, which is it's a very interesting perspective, that the experience would be tailored uniquely to each tribe, and each tribe walked through in their dry land. Okay? In this case, remember, it's Nisan, it's April. What happens in Nisan and April in Israel and in the United States as well? What happens?
It rains.
The snow melts on the mountains, right? So the Jordan River would be at its height. Beautiful. And the water is rushing down from the north, right? The Israelites are around Yericho. They're in the south. The water is coming down very, very strong, right? What happens? The water stops, as Serene says, stands up as a single column. Now, what causes the water to stand up as a single column in this case? The Kohanim.
The feet of the Kohanim?
Perfect. The feet of the Kohanim step in, touch the water, and the water stands like a pillar, like this. What are the Kohanim carrying at that point?
Aaron?
Beautiful. They're carrying the Aron. There's a discussion in the Gemara, and it's not for now, but just have it in mind because it's interesting on whether the Kohanim were carrying the Aron or the Aron was carrying the Kohanim. It's a very interesting. It says Kohanim v'Leviim nosin oto. The Kohanim and the Leviim are carrying him. So the rabbis say it's a little bit strange, the language. Maybe what was going on here was that the Aron was really supporting them and they weren't supporting the Aron. But in any case, they're standing in the water. Now, what happens to the riverbed? What happens to the riverbed? It's a sort of a small version, a miniature version of what happens to the base of the of the sea. What happens to the riverbed? It says that they're walking through the harava or yabasha. What does the word harava or yabasha mean? These are also important words to own.
Dry land.
Yabasha means the dry land, right? Now, how would this land be dry? Right, the water
Awesome. Well, only miraculously,
only
right?
miraculously, good. So here's what you need to know. In the case of the splitting of the Red Sea, the water splits either this way or into 12 sections. And then what happens is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in that case, wants to demonstrate to the Jewish people what happened in the creation of the world. So what does he do? He brings it to home, the abyss, and this is all noted in the Az Yashir, which we make our prayer every day. He brings the abyss up. He brings the bottom of the ocean up. As it comes up, it dries. And based on the Midrash, it flowers and plants and trees for this handful of minutes while this pass-through is happening. The point being that in that case, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is demonstrating how he created the world. There was water, and then there was Havdalah. The land came up and separates between water and water. You see, Jewish people, you see, I did it X years ago when I created the world, but nobody was around to see it, but now you can see it. The term Yabasha is used, which means dry land. Over here, the term Harava is used, which is a little bit tricky, because what does Harava mean? The rabbi is a little stuck on it, but then later on in the Perek, the word Yabasha is used, so the rabbis say it's really the same thing. But in any case, important to know, the word Yabasha means the shore or the dry land. In the case of the splitting of the Red Sea, there was a different process. As the water is splitting, the land is rising, or let me say it better. As the land is rising, the water is splitting. What does it sound like in modern day terms?
Tsunami.
Exactly. As the land is coming up, the water is splitting. In this case, and that again was to show the mo'inayim, in front of their eyes, that the Jewish people could see one of the key aspects, the aspect of separation of Havdalah that gave identity to many of the elements of creation. In this case, you don't have that ascension of the Tehom, of the abyss, but it does say that the water was dried out.
Ricky,
Yeah.
sorry, do they ever make the comparison to Noah and the Mabul with this? Or no?
I never heard that. Let's think.
Okay.
Let's think. I don't know. It's a great point. I never heard a comparison, but why not? The
I'm
question
saying
is
with the
why.
word Yabasha, like don't they use that word there? Or no?
We use the word Yabasha when the waters are receding, right? I think we do. I have to check. I think we do. So I think it's a great question. I never looked at the connection, but I love the idea. I love the idea of connecting because these are the three main water events in Jewish history, right?
Right, yeah.
If we're connecting these two, why not look if there's a connection to the other one? I'm going to look at it and maybe you'll do
I'm
the
gonna
same.
look at it too. Yeah, look at it.
Yeah, great. So now, what does the pasuk say? The pasuk says that the water goes up, standing in a pillar, as was mentioned, and stays that way while the Jewish people cross. The Kohanim stay in the water, and the Torah goes out of its way to say that there was no flooding. None of the local cities were harmed with flooding. So somehow, despite the fact that this was the key time, the water was at its highest point, it was April, and the water was pushed up into a column, nothing happened. It says, a tall pillar stood up, but it was far away from the closest city, and there was no flooding, and there was no damage to any city. How that happened, we don't know. Okay. To pull the pieces together. Now what do we see? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Yehoshua to take 12 people, one from each tribe, and tell them to collect the stones around the Kohanim and to bring them to the Machaneh, to the camping place, which as we mentioned earlier is called Gilgal, and to stack them. And that should be a remembrance forever about this miracle that happened. Now, did we ever do this before?
No.
Great. So what's going on? Why now? Why this?
It's the first time for everything, right?
Come on, Zeke, you're blowing the whole.
I don't.
Let me give you a hint. These stones, while we were in Gilgal, yeah.
I said F1, no.
No, they were next to the Aron, and the Aron. What did the Aron have in it?
The luchot.
Huh?
The luchot.
It had the
luchot.
broken luchot and the whole luchot, right?
Right.
It had the mateh, the staff of Aharon,
wow.
with
What about the bones of-
flowers, with the almond tree flowers that came out when there was a dispute, right, with Korach and so on. That was memorialized, put into the Aron. And what else was put into the Aron?
The bones of Yosef?
No, the bones of Yosef accompanied them when they left, but no, they were ultimately buried in Shechem. Shechem, yeah. What else was in the Aron was the man. A sampling of the man was in the Aron, and it never spoiled. So, what ends up accompanying these two miraculous testament pieces in the Aron? These 12 stones. But there's a gigantic, and we'll wrap up with this. We'll pull the pieces together, wrap up with this. There's a gigantic, absolutely fundamental difference between the 12 stones and the staff and the man. What is it? And what it is what makes these days the 37 best days in Jewish history, rather than the days when we left Egypt and the Split Sea. Why weren't those days better? No, these days were better. These days were better. And yeah, what are you saying?
No, I think these were the days that they became a nation, that they came together. They all were, they all worked together. They all believed in Hashem. They never doubted. And
what was the difference between these days and 40 years earlier with a handful of weeks, several days of one miracle after another?
They were dependent on God. They were dependent on God, and now they weren't.
Perfect. They were absolutely passive. And the difference of the stones coming rather than the staff and the man, the staff and the man had nothing to do with anything human. The stones were carried by a leader from each of the tribes. They were meant to memorialize the fact that the Kohanim carried the Aron. The Kohanim stood in the water. Wasn't an Anan, wasn't God leading the charge. It was us leading the charge. We led the charge. We split the water. We were active partners in it. And that's the fundamental difference. And when we come out of this thing, we see that the failure, so to speak, the last time around is because, God, you did everything for me. You didn't let me do anything on my own. So once the shock and awe wears off of these extraordinary miracles, I'm nowhere. Once the shock and awe wears off, now I'm trying to figure things out. But if I'm empowered, if I'm partnered with, it's the same fundamental difference between living in Gan Eden and outside of Gan Eden. Man rejected Gan Eden for good reason. He said, I don't want to be passive. I want to kill myself. I want to build. I want to have a name. I want to earn your partnership, and so on. So the great distinction here is that in this case, we were active every step of the way, from mourning Moshe Rabbeinu, to preparing, to the brisses, to crossing the Dead Sea, the Jordan, to doing Korban Pesach. We were active every step of the way. And so what do you see? The greatest leader in Jewish history was taken from the Jewish people, and they didn't skip a beat. They only got greater. How's that possible? You know, if a great king passes away, people are mourning, people are frightened what's going to be. How can it be that the greatest people, Eved Hashem, the closest person that God would ever be to, passes? And 37 days after that, within 38 days, we have one fabulous miracle after another brought about in partnership with the Jewish people. That's the difference. That's the children of the generation of the desert rather than the generation of the desert. We're partners, we're participants, we're thinkers, we're objective, and we're with it. Are we going to kick and scream? Sure we are. But we're going to kick and scream from a context of Yesh Hashem b'kirbenu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in us. It's a very different, when you kick and scream from the outside, and I know, I'll raise my hand, you know, I've done it, many of us have done it. When you kick and scream from the outside, it's completely different than kicking and screaming with your arms wrapped around HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his arms wrapped around you. Yesh Hashem b'kirbi. God is within me. That's the difference here. And that's why the results were so different. And I'm just going to close with one other thing that we'll talk about next week. You remember that when Moshe Rabbeinu goes to the sneh, to the bush that had the fire, what happens to him at that point when he goes to the bush? Anybody remember? The angel from inside the fire tells him, Shal na'alecha me'al radvecha.
Take off your shoes, right?
Right. But it wasn't about taking off his shoes. What was it about?
The ground was holy.
The ground is holy, good. But what is he telling him? Shal na'alecha. The word na'al, and this is another term you guys should know, na'al, nun ayin lamed, in Torah parlance, whether it be the Chumash or the Navi, means your physical body, not your feet, not your shoes. So when the Malach turns to Moshe Rabbeinu, he tells him, Moshe, come with me to the fifth dimension, the metaphysical dimension. Remove yourself from your physical constructs and let me show you this world that God has afforded you to see. Moshe Rabbeinu says, no, who am I? What am I? I'm not a leader. I can't speak. I'm not right for this job. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gets very angry with him. And at the end, they say at that point, HaKadosh Baruch Hu only allowed him to see a portion of what he would have been otherwise able to see from a metaphysical point of view. And
So he flubbed it. So he blew it in a sense.
It seems like it, and he had to grow into it. And it takes time for him to grow into it. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu offers, when the Bnei Israel sin, HaKadosh Baruch Hu offers to send a malach to be with them. So God would, so to speak, be a little less connected to them, and their actions would be less harshly responded to. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, no, nothing doing. In this case, we see a very interesting thing. The malach comes to Yehoshua. He tells him, Shal na'alcha, not na'alecha, meaning, so to speak, remove one shoe. Meaning that he wasn't going to get to the same place that Moshe Rabbeinu was going to get to. But he was going to get to a place that was outside of the constructs of a physical being. And Yehoshua is right there. And what happens here is a fundamental change as well going forward. When Yehoshua accepts this malach, this angel, there's another fundamental change in how we develop as a people. And we'll talk about that next week when we talk about the story of Yericho. I would just say, if anybody has a chance to read a little bit, the next couple of chapters, next couple of perakim, the 5th, 6th, 7th chapter, like that, in the book of Yehoshua, you're going to see some very interesting things in terms of how we fight battles, how we win battles. Let's talk about why the Jewish people were commanded to circle the city once a day for the first 6 days, and then circle the city a full 7 times. On what day? On Shabbat. Wow, we're going to bring the walls of the city down on Shabbat. Why? How come? What was the message here? And there, in the story of the battle of Yericho, of Jericho, coupled with the emergence of this angel, we see the next stage of things taking shape. So we started with Yehoshua and Rachav, the 2 giants who framed this book, and their lineage will frame much of what we learn going forward. And we talked about the general structure. Tonight, we talked about those key days that shaped this greatest generation in Jewish history. And now we'll see, is it a perfect generation? Thank God it's not a perfect generation. We're going to see that it's not a perfect generation, but it's still the greatest generation. And what does that mean, and how does that act out? We're going to talk about this angel next time. We're going to talk about the Battle of Yericho. And then the next giant aspect of this is Yehoshua's power to stop the movement of the sun. How does that make any sense? How does it work? How did HaKadosh Baruch Hu allow it to happen, enable it to happen? How come it never happened again? So anybody who has the opportunity to jump ahead a little bit, please do. And good. Any thoughts?
I have a question. I have a question. The stones that they collected, the Kohanim, around the Kohanim, the 12 stones that they stacked, memorialized, and then put back into the Aron.
They didn't put them in the Aron. They left them, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. They left them on the side of the Aron. They were too big to put in the Aron. I'm sorry.
I couldn't get
No,
past
I'm
that.
sorry. I wasn't clear. I wasn't clear.
And do they have anything to do with the Urim and Tumim? Anything at all?
Nothing.
Relationship?
Nothing. No, great. Nothing. But they were huge stones, let's say, and it was
like Stonehenge stones. You're talking about, like big
huge
stones.
and it was miraculous that one person was able to carry a stone.
Gotcha.
And they sit on the side of the Mishkan.
Right.
Good.
Rick, I have a question on when you go back to when you said the 3-day. So recently I learned from one of the rabbis that there's tremendous significance to 3. Is this related to this?
Well, what was he speaking about? And what? Like what?
It was, I don't know if it was Kabbalistic or whatever, but the 3 is a significant number in Judaism.
So I'm not sure what.
Right.
I'm not sure where else. I can't quickly think of another place.
Right.
But I'll think about it some more.
Right.
The 3-day rule,
Right.
particularly now, is a
Right.
super rule. It's a super rule. You know, if
It's
somebody
great
comes,
model. Could you repeat that sequence
Yeah.
again?
so the context really is when, these days, we're all at stages in our lives where people might approach us for advice, for guidance, and so on. And, the norm of the day is instant response.
Right.
But the Torah is mandating that that you remove the subjectivity from the response. And the belief is that the only way to do that and to stand purely objectively is 3 days. And the perspective is that day 1, you're subjectively totally on the side of that person, let's say, or you're
Right.
thinking in only emotional terms.
Right.
And day 2, you have a chance to balance it, to look at the other side. And day 3, you can approach the person in an objective way, which
Right.
is the way that will really enable them. And as we get older, all of us, and our children, our adult children come to us with serious questions, and our grandchildren and other community members and so on, we know a lot, thank God, we've seen a lot, but very often I've found that a couple of days later, I understand things very differently. My mind is clear, my emotion is down, and one of the key things that I find that a person can do with that 3-day pause is think about 6, 8 steps out in the future.
Right.
And that's a huge thing. You know, when we give people advice, we have to frame our advice with the perspective of, well, what does this mean for the person 5 years from now? And my personally, and I don't want to bring anybody down, but my heart has been broken more than once in this community from trying to help people pick up their pieces based on advice they got that didn't think about what that advice would put that family in 3 years or in 5 years. Well, what do you mean? Does anybody have a crystal ball? No, but we do have experience. We do have common sense. We do have Torah knowledge. And therefore, if we guide someone without, let's call it in general terms, a 3-day wait period,
Right.
without the framework of where does this leave this person in 3 years? 3 years a minute. Where does it leave the person in 5 years? Where does it leave the person? And very often people don't think that way. You know, there's a very interesting thing in the Eshet Yaffa Torah. You know, in the Torah, we have this thing where soldiers are in battle, and you know, in ancient times, a soldier could be in battle for years away from his family, and the soldier sees a lady from a prisoner or whatever from the enemy, and he takes her and he has relations with her and so on. And then he has to separate from her for a period of time to cool down and to think through his actions. And then we have, after that, we have the issue of Ben Sorer Moreh, we have the issue of Sotah, we have all kinds of issues which our rabbis connect back to that, saying that the person who acted hastily and didn't think out his perspectives, if he ended up with that lady, well, he produced a kid who is a broken child and all kinds of pain. Or he ended up with a bad marriage situation, kind of thing. So did the story ever happen? Did anybody ever take a lady in as a prisoner? Our rabbis debate it, and some of them say it never happened. So if it never happened, or rarely, why are you taking up X verses in the Torah on it? To teach us that when you give a person guidance, think 3, 4, 5 years out. Where is this guidance going to put this family? And very often people give expedient guidance, things that will help a situation in the immediate short term. But who's going to be there to pick up the situation 4 or 5 years up the road? So I think the Shloshet Yemei Hagbala, the 3 days of pause, the V'hitashtem B'Shloshet Yamim, the 3 days of sanctifying, are all about this. And I think to the extent, I think it's a very practical mandate, and it should be something that we practice as often as we can. Good?
Great.
All right. All right, thank you. Great to see everyone as always.
Thank
Good.
you.
Thank you, Ricky.
Ricky.
All the
Thanks,
best.
Rick.
Thanks, Ricky.
Take care.
Zaka
Thanks so
Baruch.
much. Bye.